Before you hear my story, I want you to do something for me. Find the subscribe button and click it, and if you feel my pain, hit the like button. It helps more than you know. Now, let me tell you how my greatest miracle became my deepest shame. NTHE World was a blur of bright lights and muffled sounds, but I remember the smell. It was the smell of antiseptic mixed with something metallic, like old blood. My body was a hollowed-out vessel, an empty ache where 9 months of life had just been. I had done it. I had brought 9 babies into this world. 9 tiny, perfect, breathing daughters. The doctors and nurses were a flurry of motion around me, their voices a low hum of awe and disbelief. 9, one of them whispered. All healthy. A miracle. That's what they called it. NBUT. Then his shadow fell over me, and the air turned cold. My husband, Omar, stood at the foot of my hospital bed, his face a mask of stone. He hadn't looked at me, not once. His eyes were fixed on the row of incubators, on the 9 small forms wrapped in pink blankets. I waited for his smile, for a word of relief, of joy, of anything other than the chilling silence that filled the space between us. And I tried to push myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. "Omar," I whispered, my voice cracking, "aren't they beautiful?" NHE finally turned his gaze to me, and what I saw in his eyes shattered the last fragile piece of my hope. It wasn't disappointment. It was pure, undiluted disgust. He walked slowly toward me, his steps heavy on the linoleum floor. The nurses paused, their professional smiles faltering as they sensed the shift in the room. NHE leaned down, his face so close to mine, I could feel the warmth of his breath. I thought he was going to whisper something, maybe a cruel word meant only for me, but he did something far worse. He gathered saliva in his mouth, his cheek puffing out for a moment, and then he spat. It landed on my cheek, a warm, vile trail of his contempt sliding down my skin. And time stopped. The murmuring of the nurses died. The hum of the machines seemed to fade into nothing. There was only the sting of his saliva on my face and the crushing weight of his hatred. He did it in front of everyone, in front of the women who had just helped me perform a miracle, in front of the tiny, innocent daughters he had just rejected in the most profound way a father could. NHE straightened up, his expression unchanged, as if he had just swatted a fly. 9 curses, he said, his voice low and venomous, for the whole room to hear. You have brought 9 curses into my house. NHE turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving me in a sea of stunned silence. I lay there, paralyzed, the spittle still wet on my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I couldn't move. I could feel the eyes of the nurses on me, a mixture of pity and horror. They didn't know what to do. No one knew what to do. In that moment, I wasn't a mother. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't even a woman. I was a monument to his shame. He had taken my miracle, the single greatest achievement of my life, and turned it into a spectacle of humiliation. He hadn't just spat on me. He had spat on them, on our 9 daughters. And as I lay there, a burning rage began to smolder in the ashes of my heart. He thought he had broken me. He had no idea he had just created a monster. And the gilded cage NMY life with Omar hadn't always been a horror story. It began as a fairy tale, or at least that's what I was led to believe. I met him at a community gala, an event my parents had pushed me to attend. He was the son of a wealthy textile magnate, a man whose name was synonymous with success in our city. Omar was handsome, polished, and possessed a charm that could disarm armies. When he spoke to me, he made me feel like I was the only person in a room of hundreds. He listened, he laughed at my clumsy jokes, and he looked at me with an intensity that made my knees weak. NMY family was comfortable, but we were not in their league. We had love and principles. They had power and legacy. When Omar asked for my hand in marriage, my parents were hesitant. My father, a man of simple wisdom, took me aside. "A golden cage is still a cage, my daughter," he warned. "Make sure he loves you, not the idea of you." I dismissed his concerns as old-fashioned worrying. I was in love, and I was convinced Omar was my soulmate. The first year of our marriage was a whirlwind of luxury. We lived in a sprawling mansion with manicured gardens and a staff that catered to our every whim. Omar showered me with gifts, designer clothes, expensive jewelry, exotic trips. I was living a life most people only dreamed of. But slowly I began to notice the bars of the gilded cage my father had warned me about. My opinions were gently dismissed in public. My friends were deemed unsuitable for our new social standing. My desire to continue my education was laughed off as a cute hobby I no longer needed. Omar wasn't cruel, not then. He was controlling, but he did it with a smile. He framed his control as care. "I just want what's best for you, my love," he'd say, stroking my hair. "You don't need to worry your pretty little head about finances/decisions/the outside world." I was his prized possession, a beautiful doll to be displayed on his arm, and for a while, I convinced myself that this was love. Obsession with a son began almost immediately. In his world, legacy was everything, and a legacy required a male heir. Our first pregnancy was celebrated with a lavish party. Omar was ecstatic, already buying miniature suits and talking about the business empire his son would one day inherit. When the doctor announced we were having a girl, the light in his eyes dimmed, just for a second. He recovered quickly, smiling and kissing me, but I saw it, that flicker of disappointment. Our first daughter, Amara, was born, and she was perfect. I fell in love instantly, but Omar's affection felt performative. He would hold her for photographs, but the moment the camera was gone, he would hand her back to the nanny. "Next time, we'll get our boy," he'd whisper to me at night, as if I had failed a test and was being given a second chance. Pressure mounted with each pregnancy. After our second daughter, the gifts stopped. After our third, the public displays of affection ceased. After our fourth, his conversations with me became clipped and transactional. Our home, once a place of laughter, became a silent, tense palace where I felt like a ghost. He started spending more and more time at the office, returning late with the smell of expensive perfume that wasn't mine, clinging to his clothes. And I became a prisoner of my own life, isolated and lonely. My only solace was my daughters. They were bright, beautiful, and full of the life that was slowly being drained from me. I poured all my love into them, teaching them to be strong, to be kind, and to value themselves, even if their own father didn't. When I found out I was pregnant again, the news was terrifying. The doctor's appointment was a blur. I remember him looking at the ultrasound screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was silent for a long time before he finally turned to me, his face a mixture of shock and concern. "Mrs. Khan," he said slowly, "you're not carrying one baby, or two, or even three." He paused, taking a deep breath. "You're carrying 9. World tilted on its axis. 9. The number was incomprehensible, a medical marvel, the doctor called it. A high-risk, once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon. My first thought was a surge of pure, unadulterated terror. How could my body handle this? How could I possibly care for 13 children? But then, a second thought, a desperate, treacherous flicker of hope, ignited within me. With 9 babies, surely one of them had to be a boy. Surely this was my chance to finally win back my husband's affection, to fix my broken family, to earn my place in his life again. And I went home and told Omar. For the first time in years, his face broke into a genuine, beaming smile. He lifted me up and spun me around, laughing. 9, he shouted. "This is it. The gods have answered my prayers. My son is in there. My sons." He was instantly transformed back into the charming man I had fallen in love with. He hired the best doctors, put me on strict bed rest, and waited on me hand and foot. He was attentive, loving, and hopeful. And like a fool, I let myself believe that everything would be okay. I clung to that fragile hope for the entire 9 months, praying not just for the health of my babies, but for the salvation of my marriage. I didn't realize I was praying for the wrong thing. I should have been praying for escape. And the promise in the silence NTHE days following the birth were a silent, agonizing blur. Omar did not return to the hospital. He sent no word. It was as if he and the life we had built had vanished. The hospital staff treated me with a delicate, suffocating kindness. They would enter my room with sad eyes and gentle smiles, speaking in hushed tones, as if I were a fragile piece of glass. They cleaned the spot on my cheek where he had spat, but they couldn't wipe away the stain on my soul. My daughters were kept in the neonatal intensive care unit, tiny warriors fighting for strength in their plastic boxes. I was allowed to see them, to press my hand against the incubators and whisper the names I had chosen for them: Lena, Rania, Sarah, Nora, Dana, Huda, Farah, Yasmin, and Zoya. Each name was a promise, a secret vow I made to them in the sterile silence of the NICU. I promised them I would be enough. I promised them a life where they would be cherished, not cursed. NTHE Hospital Administration began to ask questions. When will your husband be arranging for payment? What are the plans for bringing the children home? They were polite, but the underlying message was clear. I was a problem to be solved. A woman with 9 premature babies and an absent wealthy husband was a logistical and financial nightmare. NMY-owned family arrived, their faces etched with worry. My father held my hand, his grip firm and grounding. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just looked at me, his eyes full of the love Omar had so cruelly withheld. "We will figure this out," he said, his voice a balm on my raw nerves. "You are not alone." NBUTI felt alone. At night, when the hospital was quiet and the weight of my reality pressed down on me, I would stare at the ceiling and feel the rage building inside me. It was a cold, hard knot in my chest. The humiliation of that moment, his spit on my face, the word curses echoing in the silent room, played on a loop in my mind. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war. He had publicly discarded me and his own children. He had assumed I would crumble, that I would crawl back and beg for his forgiveness. NHE underestimated me. He had spent years turning me into a decorative object, forgetting that even the most beautiful things can have the sharpest edges. He didn't know about the strength I had found in raising my first 4 daughters, the resilience I had learned from years of silent suffering. And he certainly didn't understand the primal power of a mother whose children had been threatened. NMY plan began to form in the darkness of that hospital room. It wasn't a plan born of passion or a desire for petty revenge. It was cold, calculated, and absolute. I wouldn't just leave him. I wouldn't just take his money. I would dismantle his entire world, piece by piece, until he was left with nothing but the shame he had tried to heap upon me. I would use the very things he valued most, his name, his reputation, his legacy, as the weapons of his destruction. NTHE first step was to secure my children. I spoke with the hospital's social worker, a kind but firm woman named Mrs. Gable. I told her everything. The years of emotional neglect, the obsession with a male heir, and the final, horrific act in the delivery room. I showed her the strength of my resolve, not the weakness of my tears. I wasn't a victim seeking pity. I was a mother seeking protection for her children. She listened, her expression hardening with every word. By the end of our conversation, she was my first ally. She began making calls, pulling strings, and preparing the legal groundwork to ensure Omar could not get his hands on my daughters. NTHE's second step was to become invisible. Omar's power was in his wealth and influence. To fight him, I had to get off his grid. My father, using his life savings, arranged for a small, discreet apartment in a different part of the city, a place where no one would think to look for the wife of a tycoon. It was a world away from the mansion I had left, but it was safe. It was a sanctuary. And as I prepared to leave the hospital, a package arrived for me. It was from Omar. There was no note. Inside was a check for a substantial amount of money and a set of divorce papers, already signed by him. It was a payoff, a severance package. He thought he could buy my silence, that he could erase me and his 9 daughters from his life with a bank transaction. He wanted me to take the money, sign the papers, and disappear. And I looked at the check, at the zeros that were meant to represent my worth. I thought about cashing it, about using his own money to fund my new life. But that would be too easy. It would be playing his game. I picked up a pen, but I didn't sign the divorce papers. Instead, I wrote a single sentence across the back of the check. Justice is not for sale. I put the check and the unsigned papers back in the envelope and mailed it back to his office. It was my first move, my first shot fired. I wanted him to know that I was not going away. I was not going to be silenced. The war had begun, and I would not rest until I was the one left standing and forging the armine. The first few months were the hardest. We moved into the small 2-bedroom apartment my father had secured. It was cramped and bare, a stark contrast to the opulent prison I had left behind. The 9 newborns required round-the-clock care. My days and nights blurred into a relentless cycle of feeding, changing, and soothing. My 4 older daughters, bless their hearts, became my little soldiers. Amara, the eldest, learned to prepare simple meals. The others helped with the babies, rocking them to sleep, their young faces serious with a responsibility far beyond their years. NWE were poor. The money from my father was running out, and the cost of formula, diapers, and basic necessities for 13 children was astronomical. There were nights I went to bed hungry, ensuring every last drop of milk and every crumb of bread went to my girls. Desperation was a constant gnawing presence. But in that tiny apartment, surrounded by the cries and coos of my daughters, something new was being forged. A family. A real one. Not one based on wealth or legacy, but on unconditional love and shared survival. NMY anger became my fuel. Every time I felt like giving up, I would remember the look on Omar's face, the feel of his spit on my cheek. That memory was a fire that burned away my exhaustion and fear. I knew I couldn't fight him with money or power, because he had all of it. I had to fight him with the one thing he had so carelessly thrown away, the truth. And I started by reaching out to the other women Omar had discarded. It wasn't hard to find them. His reputation for infidelity was an open secret in our social circles. I found them through quiet inquiries, through friends of friends. The first one I met was a former assistant he'd had an affair with, a woman he had promised the world to before firing her when she became inconvenient. She was bitter and broken. I didn't ask her for help. I offered her a chance at justice. I told her my story, and in her eyes, I saw a reflection of my own pain. She agreed to help. One by one, I gathered my army. There was the interior designer he had cheated on his wife with years ago, leaving her with a shattered reputation. There was the young intern he had harassed, who had been too scared to speak up. There was even a distant cousin of his, a woman whose family he had financially ruined in a shady business deal. Each woman had a story, a piece of the puzzle of Omar's cruelty. Separately, we were victims. Together, we were an arsenal. NWE met in secret, in quiet cafes and parks, our heads bent together, sharing documents, timelines, and evidence. I collected their stories, their sworn affidavits, their pain. I was no longer just fighting for myself and my daughters. I was fighting for all of them. NMY's greatest ally came from an unexpected place. I remembered Mrs. Gable, the hospital social worker. I called her, not for help, but for advice. I told her what I was doing, and she connected me with a pro bono legal aid society that specialized in women's rights. There, I met Anjali Sharma, a young, fiery lawyer with eyes that burned with a passion for justice. When I told Anjali my story, she didn't see a helpless victim. She saw a fighter. She listened to every detail, her expression growing more determined with each word. When I finished, she looked at the stack of evidence I had collected from the other women. "This is not just a divorce case, Mrs. Khan," she said, her voice firm. "This is a character assassination, and we are going to give him the trial he deserves, not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion." Nanjali's strategy was brilliant. We wouldn't sue for money. We would sue for custody and for a formal, public apology. The demand for an apology was key. It was something he would never give, and his refusal would be his undoing. We would leak the stories, the affidavits, the evidence of his affairs, his financial crimes, his cruelty, one by one, to the media. We would create a narrative, a storm of public outrage that would erode his carefully constructed empire of lies. While Anjali prepared the legal battle, I prepared for the social one. I started a blog, an anonymous blog. I called it The Lioness and Her Cubs. I began to write. I wrote about my life, about the gilded cage, about the birth of my daughters, and about the final, unforgivable act of humiliation. I wrote with a raw, unflinching honesty that I had never allowed myself before. I didn't name Omar. I simply called him the King. NTHE blog started small, but the story was too powerful to ignore. It was shared, first by friends, then by strangers. Women from all over the country started commenting, sharing their own stories of abuse and control. My personal battle was becoming a movement. The King's identity became a subject of intense speculation in online forums. Omar, in his arrogance, was oblivious. He was too busy with his business deals and his new life, free from the curses he had left behind. He had no idea that an army was amassing at his gates, an army of wronged women, led by a mother with nothing left to lose. He had no idea that the anonymous blogger, who was slowly turning the city against him, was the same woman he had tried to erase with a check. He thought he had silenced me, but I had found my voice, and it was getting louder every day, and the whispers of truth, NTHE first leak, was small, almost insignificant. An anonymous tip to a local gossip columnist about a prominent businessman's long-standing affair with his assistant. No names were mentioned, but the details were specific enough to start whispers in the elite circles Omar moved in. It was a test, a stone thrown into the water to see how far the ripples would spread. They spread further than we expected. Omar's world was built on a fragile foundation of reputation. In his business, perception was reality. The whispers started to affect him. I heard through the grapevine that a crucial deal he was working on had been delayed. His potential partners were getting nervous. NTHAT was when Anjali filed the official court papers. We didn't serve them to him at his office. We served them to him during a high-profile charity dinner he was hosting. A process server walked right up to his table in front of all his powerful friends and business associates and handed him the documents. The demand was simple and audacious: full custody of the 13 children to their mother, and a public written apology for unconscionable cruelty and public humiliation. NTHE demand for an apology was a stroke of genius. It made him look weak if he considered it, and monstrous if he refused. The story exploded. The media, already sniffing around due to the anonymous blog and the gossip columns, now had a name to attach to the scandal. Tycoon Omar Khan sued by wife after birth of 9 daughters. The headlines were brutal. NMY blog, The Lioness and Her Cubs, went viral overnight. I was no longer anonymous. I released a statement through Anjali, confirming that I was the author. I became the face of the story. Reporters camped outside my tiny apartment building. I was offered money for interviews, for photos of the babies. I refused it all. I communicated only through my blog and through Anjali. I would not let them turn my story into a circus. This was about justice, not fame. NTHE other women, my secret army, saw the tide turning and felt emboldened. One by one, they came forward. The former assistant gave an on-the-record interview to a national magazine, complete with emails and text messages from Omar. The interior designer spoke to a television news program, her voice shaking but resolute. The evidence we had gathered was no longer a secret weapon. It was a public indictment. Omar's reaction was predictable. He went on the offensive. His high-priced legal team released a statement calling me an unstable, vindictive liar. They claimed I was suffering from severe postpartum depression, that I was manipulating the situation for financial gain. They painted me as a scorned woman trying to extort a wealthy man. In but, their attacks backfired. For every lie they told, I responded with a truth on my blog. When they called me unstable, I wrote about the quiet strength it took to care for 13 children alone. When they accused me of wanting money, I reminded the world that I had sent back his check. I posted photos, not of my face, but of my life. A mountain of diapers, a line of 9 tiny baby bottles, my older daughters reading bedtime stories to the little ones. I showed the world the reality of my struggle, and it resonated far more than his corporate press releases, and public opinion turned against him like a tidal wave. Women's groups organized rallies in my support. The ##TGMthelianess started trending worldwide. People started boycotting his family's textile company. Retailers began pulling their products from the shelves. The whispers had become a roar, and it was shaking the very foundations of his empire. NHE was trapped. Every move he made sank him deeper. He was losing business, he was losing respect, and for the first time in his life, he was losing control. The man who believed he was a king was quickly becoming a pariah. One evening, my father came to visit. He sat with me in the small living room, watching as I fed one of the babies. "You have done it, my daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have held a mirror up to him, and the whole world can see the monster inside." I looked around my cramped apartment, at the beautiful, chaotic life I had built from the ashes of my old one. I was tired, I was stretched thin, but I was not broken. I was powerful. My army of wronged women had found their voices. My army of daughters slept peacefully in the other room, safe and loved. NTHE final piece of our plan was about to fall into place. Anjali had discovered Omar's deepest secret, the one he had guarded more fiercely than his money or his reputation. It was a crime so profound that it would not just ruin him, it would utterly destroy him. And we were ready to reveal it to the world. The king's secret. While the court of public opinion was convicting Omar, Anjali was digging into the one area he thought was untouchable, the origins of his family's fortune. The Khan textile empire was legendary, a story of grit and genius passed down through generations. But Anjali, with her relentless tenacity, suspected the official story was a lie. She spent weeks poring over old property deeds, financial records, and archived newspapers, chasing a ghost of a rumor she had unearthed. NSHE found it in a dusty box in the city archives. It was a land deed from 50 years ago for the very plot of land where the first Khan factory stood. The land hadn't been bought. It had been acquired from a small, family-run orphanage that had mysteriously burned down, killing several children and its owner. The official cause was faulty wiring, a tragic accident. But the records showed that Omar's grandfather, the patriarch of the Khan dynasty, had acquired the land for a fraction of its value just days after the fire, from the sole, terrified survivor, the owner's brother. It wasn't just a shady business deal. It was blood money. The entire Khan empire, the source of Omar's power, his pride, and his arrogance, was built on the ashes of a tragedy he and his family had orchestrated. Anjali found a living witness, the grandson of the man who had been forced to sell the land, an old man who still lived in the city, carrying the story his grandfather had told him in hushed, fearful whispers. This was the kill shot. This wasn't about infidelity or cruelty anymore. This was about a deep, generational crime that would sicken the public and attract the attention of criminal investigators. NWE had to be strategic. We couldn't just drop this bombshell. We had to set the stage for maximum impact. Anjali arranged for a major television interview for me with a respected journalist known for her tough, investigative reporting. Omar's lawyers, believing I would crumble under pressure, foolishly agreed, seeing it as a chance for me to publicly humiliate myself. They had no idea what was coming. NTHE night of the interview, I was terrified. I sat in the studio, the bright lights hot on my face, my heart pounding in my chest. But then I thought of my 13 daughters. I thought of the women whose lives Omar had ruined. I thought of the children who had died in that fire 50 years ago. My fear turned into cold, hard resolve. NTHE interview began as expected. The journalist, Sarah, asked me about my marriage, about the birth, about the incident in the hospital. I answered calmly and honestly, sticking to the facts. Then, Sarah turned to the camera. Omar Khan has refused to be interviewed, but he has sent a statement from his legal team, which I will now read. NSHE read his statement, full of the usual denials and accusations. It called me a liar, emotionally disturbed, and an unfit mother. When she finished, she turned back to me, her expression serious. "Mrs. Khan," she said, "you have heard his accusations. What is your response?" This was the moment. I took a deep breath. "He calls me a liar," I began, my voice steady. "But his entire life, his entire family legacy, is built on a lie far greater than any he accuses me of. He talks about his name, his reputation, but he has never told the world how his family truly acquired that name." And I looked directly into the camera. I was no longer just speaking to the journalist. I was speaking to the world. I was speaking directly to him. "He calls my daughters curses," I said, my voice rising with controlled fury. "But the only curse is the one his family brought upon themselves 50 years ago when they built their empire on the graves of orphan children." And I laid out the entire story. The fire, the orphanage, the forced land sale, the blood money. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I delivered the facts with a chilling precision that left no room for doubt. As I spoke, the network displayed the documents Anjali had uncovered: the old land deed, the newspaper clippings about the fire, the sworn affidavit from the survivor's grandson. The studio was silent. Sarah, the journalist, was speechless. In the control room, producers were scrambling. This wasn't the domestic drama they had expected. This was a true crime story of the highest order. NTHE interview ended, and I walked out of the studio feeling lighter than I had in years. I had done it. I had detonated the bomb at the heart of his kingdom. NTHE fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The interview went viral on a global scale. #CannBloodMoney became the #1 trending topic in the world. The stock of Khan Textiles plummeted, losing over 80% of its value in a single day. Business partners severed all ties. Government agencies announced multiple criminal investigations into the Khan family's history. The police reopened the 50-year-old arson case. Nomar was ruined, not just financially, but fundamentally. His name, the one thing he had prized above all else, was now synonymous with crime and death. He was a pariah in the truest sense of the word. He had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The truth, which he had so arrogantly dismissed, had hunted him down and ripped his world apart. He was finally, truly, powerless in the echo of justice. In the weeks that followed the interview, Omar's world collapsed in on itself. The authorities, armed with the evidence Anjali had unearthed and the public pressure of a global scandal, moved swiftly. His father, old and frail, was implicated in the cover-up. His family's assets were frozen. The Grand Khan mansion, the gilded cage where I had spent so many years, was seized as part of the investigation. Nomar was arrested. I saw it on the news. There were no cameras allowed, but a journalist captured a grainy photo on their phone. It showed him being led away in handcuffs, his head bowed, his expensive suit rumpled. He looked small, defeated. The king had been dethroned, not by a rival in business, but by the woman he had spat on and discarded. NHE tried to fight, of course. His lawyers filed motions and appeals, but the weight of the evidence, both criminal and moral, was too overwhelming. The other women I had gathered, my army, all gave their testimony to the police, painting a picture of a man with a pattern of abuse and a belief that he was above the law. His character was in the gutter, and no one was willing to help him. NTHE legal battle for custody of my daughters was over before it began. He didn't even contest it. In a quiet, unceremonious court hearing, I was granted sole and absolute custody of all 13 of my girls. His name was removed from their birth certificates. Legally, And in every other way that mattered, he was no longer their father. He had ceased to exist in our lives. Justice, I learned, is not a single moment. It's a process. It was there in the quiet relief on the faces of the other women who had found the courage to speak. It was there in the respectful nods I received from strangers on the street. It was there in the donations that poured in from people around the world who had been moved by my story, allowing me to secure a larger, more comfortable home for my family. In BUT, the truest justice was found in the small, everyday moments. It was in the sound of my daughters, laughter, free and uninhibited, filling every room of our new home. It was in the way my eldest, Amara, no longer flinched when a door opened unexpectedly. It was in the bright, curious eyes of my 9 youngest, growing up in a world where they were the center of their mother's universe, cherished and adored, and I never spoke of Omar to them. As they grew, if they asked, I would tell them the truth in a way they could understand, but I would not let his shadow darken their childhoods. Their story would not be about the father who rejected them. It would be about the mother and sisters who loved them fiercely. And I continued my blog, but its tone changed. It was no longer a chronicle of pain, but a beacon of hope. I wrote about second chances, about the strength of sisterhood, and about the power of a mother's love. I became an advocate for women's rights, using my platform to help others who were trapped in situations like the one I had escaped. And one day, about a year after the arrest, a letter arrived. It was from a prison. It was from him. My first instinct was to burn it. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The letter was short, just a few lines scrawled in a shaky hand. I am sorry, it read. I see their faces in my dreams. The 9 of them. I see what I lost. I have nothing left. And I read the words, but I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, no anger, just a quiet emptiness. His apology, if that's what it was, had come too late. It wasn't for me. It was for him, a desperate plea from a man drowning in the consequences of his own actions. He hadn't lost anything, because he never truly had it in the first place. You cannot lose what you never valued. And I folded the letter and put it away. His story was over. Mine was just beginning. And a garden of daughters' years have passed. The storm has long since settled, and the world has moved on to other headlines, other scandals. Omar is a footnote in history, a cautionary tale whispered in business schools about hubris and downfall. He was convicted, along with his father, and will spend the rest of his life in prison, a king confined to a concrete cell. And I never remarried. My life is full enough. My home is not a palace of marble and gold, but it is rich with what truly matters: love, laughter, and chaos. It is a house of women, a vibrant, bustling ecosystem of 13 daughters, each one unique, each one brilliant. Namara, my eldest, is in law school now. She wants to be like Anjali, a fighter for those who have no voice. My other older girls are excelling in their own fields. One is a gifted artist, another a budding scientist, the third a passionate community organizer. They are strong, compassionate, and fearless. They are everything he said they wouldn't be. And my 9 little miracles? They are no longer little. They are teenagers now, a whirlwind of energy, arguments, and inside jokes. They are 9 best friends, a built-in support system who navigate the world with a confidence that takes my breath away. They are beautiful, not because of the clothes they wear or the faces they were born with, but because of the kindness in their hearts and the fire in their spirits. Sometimes, I stand in the doorway of our living room and just watch them. I see them helping each other with homework, braiding each other's hair, arguing over the remote control, and then collapsing into a heap of laughter. In these moments, I see my legacy, not a legacy of wealth or a family name, but a legacy of resilience. A legacy of love that was forged in the fires of betrayal. And I turned the shame he tried to bury me under into a garden, and I grew 13 magnificent flowers. NTHE. Other day, my youngest, Zoya, who has my eyes and my stubborn spirit, came to me with a history textbook. She pointed to a small paragraph under the chapter on famous corporate crimes. It was about the Khan textile scandal.